Before I going to formally introduce Christi, I would like to just say a few things about the kind of projects that we're running here. The one is that the Redirections, Knowledge Praxis and African Purpose seminar series, which we are co-hosting with the CANRAD today, has to do with the way in which we engage with the big questions of our time and how we then bring to bear various forms of interpretive skills for making sense of it. And the question around the book review, tackling key constructions around whiteness, of course, is one of the key questions of our time. Follows on, of course, and Zandi is here, when we had an earlier discussion on the phenomenology of blackness. And so we're trying to bring all these major contextual challenges into our space for thoughtful deliberations. With the idea, of course, that we have one world and in commons, where we have to make sense of getting along in various forms of solidarities, antagonisms, and contradictions and conflicts. But, craft out of that the kind of social order within which humanity can flourish in different kinds of settings. So that is key in the South African space. Of course, we have massive other challenges, coming to the fore now, especially in the context of the land question debate and so on. Massive essentialisms and race populism, more or less overwhelming the globe, across a massive oceans. Right? So we are in a bit of an interesting space around the question of discrimination, whiteness, blackness, racism, and so on. And the project around bringing people together across various forms of solidarities is not dislocated from what the possibilities that one sees on a daily basis. And that in so many various kinds of small spaces, you can see what may be possible if we can upscale it into bigger forms of political practice and actions, of course. But this requires hard work and of course, dexterous thinking, massive, interesting work on the self in its own reconfiguration. Some of the work, Rachel is probably going to clap me one of these days because I keep on referring to some of her work that she's been doing. So there is a bit of a program and project emerging out of this. So the social question of is a critical white project possible, or is a white progressive project possible that can link up with the massive social injustices of our times, will be a perpetual question that we're going to take right throughout our work, and see whether we can generate different sets of praxis around this. The project, of course, does always have its different sets of precedents. Now, the one is, for instance, I was telling Christi about where in my mind, where the merge was first a friend of ours, attending the City Pretty book launch in Johannesburg, saying that, after these kinds of presentations, then most of the participants will ask, okay, so what do we then now do? There's a sense from our white colleagues that the formulation of the critique is there, but the idea of what must happen after the critique and the possibilities to become involved in massive practices, those kinds of questions, of course, are key. And those are the kinds of challenges that a chair like ours must take on board. Otherwise, our transformation project is not going to go anywhere, if it doesn't work within the context of the in-commons and building various kinds of solidarities. Of course, there will be schisms and finger pointings and massive critiques this way, that way, and the other, and those are needed for these kinds of difficult dialogues. And the second impetus came from the Dean's forums that I from time to time get invited to. And then the Deans more or less, put the question forward, coming from their white colleagues, is there a particular kind of place for us in a socially just democratic dispensation and institution? Now, of course, the question in my mind would be yes, but it seems that there are certain kinds of blockages and constraints for us to see that as a big possibility coming to the fore. So the question that is on the table today via the book launch, and which will be taken further tomorrow, and which was started by the discussion and interview that I had with Rio and Zandi, and then of course Rachel's work, is something that frames this particular ideas that we want to take through the chair. And we do think that it's probably one of the key questions, apart from the major other massive challenges that we are facing. And so with that, of course, that is the kind of introduction to framing what I regard as probably two of the, part of the reason why I bring them together, because they actually work together very well. If you read them together, and I haven't actually had the time, but of course when I read the one piece, I always think of what the other book says. No? And this is this one, which is, of course, here we have the author, Christi van der Beste, so please give her a nice hand. And Christi, in fact, if I have to read out the biography, she is now actually a future Mandela academic, joining CANRAD from the 1st of January next year. So that's another hand for Christi. Okay. So we have coached Dr. Holtzman from UP, and now Christi. If you guys find anybody else out there from Turkey, please let us know. We can create an expert community for them in this space. This book already has generated a couple of interesting reviews now. Christi has been a journalist, a social activist, writing in the Vrije Weekblad during the apartheid years, fascinating stuff. Just in the context of professional and biographical histories that come through this particular kind of persona, but of course, an associate professor at the present moment at the University of Pretoria, with a range of brilliant articles and book chapters behind, especially in the context of social justice work, how you mobilize various kinds of critical theories and post-structural thinking in making a social justice project possible from a thinking-doing perspective. And of course, this is, you're probably working on other books as well, but this is the one that we're launching here today. At the time when the book came out last year, I just wasn't prepared because I just started here. You remember that we couldn't get a particular kind of date together. But I always had that in mind, that we will have this discussion around Sitting Pretty. Of course, the book is also available for you to buy later on. In this book, of course, it ends with fascinating possibilities as how one can mobilize the ideas around shame as productive, gentle formations of reconstituting oneself in the democratic polity of the new South Africa, which, of course, if you have read this one, more or less has the same type of closing chapter. This one is about the incommons, about how we live in one world and where one has to provide for ways in which social solidarities can develop. Now, Christi is here, Achille is not here, of course, so I will read on his behalf just five lines, okay? But as long as the retreat, and of course this book has to do about how blackness emerges as a category of dehumanization, both in scholarly work but also in practice. And this is what I think is a very, very hopeful paragraph in the closing chapter. It's called There Is Only One World. But as long as the retreat from humanity is incomplete, there is still a possibility of restitution, reparation, and justice. These are the conditions for the collective resurgence of humanity. Thinking through what must come will of necessity be a thinking through of life, of the reserves of life, of what must escape sacrifice. Now, the reason why I brought this in conversation is simply to say that there is a particular form of connection between thinking across various forms of histories and experiences that brings us to forms of imagination within which real social solidarities are made possible through various forms of interpretations. But of course, that doesn't displace the need for very rigorous critique of our present context. and what we are as social subjects within the space. And of course, that will probably also come through Christi's presentation. So for me, then, I will start off with a very standard type of question, And so we will have like 30 to 35 minutes of this and that and the other, and then I'll hand it over to you to engage Christi in different kinds of ways. So Christi, tell us about yourself, and how the idea of the book came about. What was it that made you think this is a possible project for you to put on the table?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Andre. It's fantastic to be with you today, and thank you to everybody for coming out on a Thursday afternoon. Do appreciate it, and it's lovely to be here with you. In terms of my work over the past couple of decades, as Andre mentioned, I was a journalist, a political journalist, covering Parliament and engaging with the politics of the day, but also with how white people were responding. I was working for Beeld newspaper, which is an Afrikaans language newspaper based in Gauteng, and just seeing how readers respond to news, to stories, to questions that arise, and so forth. And that was also the time when I was working as a political journalist was actually the time also of the TRC, and that brought up a lot of very intense debates. 20 years later, people sort of forget a little bit about the kind of confrontation that the TRC also represented. A lot of people dismiss the TRC now as incomplete, and of course there are many criticisms against the process, and I think many of those criticisms are valid. But at the time, it did provide a moment of confrontation with exactly what it took, the kinds of violences that it took to sustain apartheid. And in a sense, white people were really, they couldn't really turn away. So there was quite a bit of also self-confrontation that was happening. If I think back to the pages of the newspapers, the kinds of conversations people were having, and so forth. And my interest has always been in how can we shift white people, how can we, is it possible to democratize white people? Can white people actually be full participants and contribute to a democracy and also in a way that confronts the injustices from the past that benefited them? And this has always been a question for me that I've been trying to address in various ways in my work throughout the years. So with the TRC and so on, one could see, I thought this is actually a very good opportunity for that kind of confrontation with the South. But as the 2000s arrived and dragged on, and as various political crises and economic crises and social crises and so forth started to beset us from one day to the next, one started to see a kind of what seems to me a hardening in the white position, kind of an intransigence that's actually started to take hold of white people. And my first book, White Power and the Rise and Fall of the National Party, was actually to address this whole question, this denialism that actually had set in by the mid-2000s, there was even an Afrikaans, some obscure Afrikaans band that had a song that said, basically, we're sick of saying sorry. And I was like, but I can't recall you actually saying sorry in the first place. So at what point did you become sick of it, of something that you haven't actually done? So there was really this kind of white denialism. Of course, whiteness to a large extent depends on denial about present and historical injustices that were perpetrated in ways that benefited white people. So I mean, denialism is almost like a central plank of white identity. And with White Power, I tried to address that question, because if you look at the National Party, the once mighty party of apartheid, and the fact that absolutely nobody ever voted for it, as we know now, even though it stayed in power for 50 odd years. What was interesting to me was the kind of distance that white people were able to put between themselves and this most atrocious party. So by the mid-2000s, there was no interest even. I think to even find, just on the day when the National Party collapsed into the ANC, to find like a proper news report in especially the Afrikaans press on, what happened to the National Party, what's gone on, how can it be collapsing into its mortal enemy, Those questions being asked, and it's some kind of attempt to answer those questions, there was absolutely nothing. So there was this kind of, that for me was part of that denialism. So, but the white power was at the level of mostly sort of class and race analysis. And I realized that at the end of the book, 140,000 words later, I could not actually, I was still sort of captivated by the question of what happens at the subjective level, actually. What is it that got Afrikaners and white people generally, so what sort of ensnared them and what took them along with the project of apartheid, flowing out of colonialism. And that's where Sitting Pretty comes in. So Sitting Pretty is much more of an analysis that using post-structural thinking and theories to try and sort of drill down in how, into how do we actually constitute ourselves, literally, what are the kinds of resources that we use to constitute ourselves. But I was interested in, as I'm interested in whiteness, which is a center of from where power is exercised, I'm also interested in intersexuality for the same reason, and middle classness. So I'm looking at heterosexual middle class women, and but of course, womanhood or femininity brings in a different, because that is actually a subjugated status. So I thought it would be interesting to look at these intersections, what these particular subjects are doing, because they find themselves in a unique position where under apartheid they could not fulfill their full human potential. If you look at the absence of women, I mean, this is now a system that's advancing white people, but you see almost complete absence of white women in positions of importance during the apartheid years. Even Afrikaner women, Afrikaners obviously benefited most by far from apartheid. Afrikaner women also quite absent in the public sphere, quite absent in terms of any kinds of sort of assertions of themselves or any kind of achievement of any real sort. So, and that's what I wanted to see in a democratic context. What, are you using that hopefully the insights that you're getting as somebody who shares a subjugated status, but you also do hold some other positions of power, and does democracy actually create the opportunity to become more fully humanized yourself, but also be more fully humanized in your interaction with black people, so to see really if white women were able to use this incredible historical opportunity that we've been granted, to use that to actually become more fully human in how we interact.
Thank you so much, Christi. Of course, I'll come to the analytical term of what we implicate later on. But you mobilized Ingrid Jonker in a fascinating opening chapter to precisely think that there may have been a missed opportunity. Can you say more about it when Mandela used Ingrid Jonker?
So it sort of, I was quite tickled by the fact that of all possible people that Nelson Mandela could have referred to, among Afrikaners, that he specifically picked Ingrid Jonker in his first address as president of our country, his inaugural address, and he specifically spoke about her and he quoted some of her work. And he particularly spoke about how she confronted her own Afrikanerness, but how she felt, how she situated herself very much in the African context on one hand, and then on the other hand, how she felt compelled to try and address, within her medium now, which is poetry, to address the injustices of her time. In a way that she committed suicide. I think her life became quite unbearable for her because she was at complete odds with her father, who was a National Party senator at that time. He was heading, in fact, the censorship committee at that time in Parliament. So he was on completely the other side. He was part of the committee that was censoring creative work at that time. And in fact, the particular book of poetry called Worker, Smoke and Ochre, I think it would translate as, was there was some pressure to remove that particular poem that is about the child who was, it started with the child who was shot dead by soldiers at Longbow. So there was pressure actually to remove that, to excise that poem. And I think Mandela, by invoking her as, in a sense, in Afrikaner nationalist terms, she would be seen as kind of like a failed femininity, a woman who couldn't crack it, who committed suicide as well, obviously some kind of weakling, and so forth and so on. You know, there would be a lot of judgment actually over somebody like her. And the fact that he particularly brought her to the fore as a kind of a model of a different kind of way of being, of actually acknowledging injustice, even to some risk to yourself. I don't want to, of course, exaggerate her activities. She doesn't compare to the kinds of sacrifices made by black people in the apartheid years. But she did actually put herself in a quite untenable position personally. And he was, in a sense, challenging Afrikaner women. So, I mean, you're not in the apartheid time anymore, you're now in a constitutional democracy, where for the first time your full humanity is actually being acknowledged. And what are you going to do with that?
Yeah, of course, for those, we have many people like me who love poetry, actually, some of that fascinating work can be accessed even via Christi's book. Now, of course, the challenge that Mandela put in terms of white people taking their space in a new democratic dispensation to work towards their own humanity and those of others, of course, seems to have been lost in the way that you bring to bear with your analysis on incident Prof Christi. But before I get into the main question around the top arguments that you would like to share with us today, and maybe you can collapse those. You will have to say something about how you mobilize or delegate as a concept, both normatively and as a political frame. And then also, let's just say something about the volkswoede and how you then work it through your analysis within the book. And if you want to take a break, you can refer back to me, but of course you can also just condense some of the main arguments that you would like to make via using those skills.
Thanks, Andre. So basically, as I was doing the research, I did it's post-structuralist analysis, so it's not quantitative. I can't give you the definitive answer on these women, like quantitative researchers would like, well, think that I can do. I'm fully a qualitative researcher in that sense. So it's I had a number of focus groups in Cape Town and Johannesburg. And from there, I did I actually selected some of the women for individual in-depth interviews. And I also did a discourse analysis. So the discourse analysis of the texts that came out of those interviews. And I did a discourse analysis of the women's magazine Sari, which at that point was still, I think, the second largest women's magazine. I think it's sort of shrunk in the meantime, but it's over its with 60, 70 odd years of existence, it's actually been one of the most successful women's magazines in South Africa. So I wanted to try and answer this question around what are Afrikaner women doing with democratic possibilities that are being presented to them. But then soon enough it became clear that the Afrikaner identity is under major political pressure. Of course, it has been since, well, even before the fall of official apartheid. So many women who would previously have identified as Afrikaners don't do so anymore, and that sort of set me on a path of trying to find some other kind of concept to try and capture this identity, and I arrived at authenticate because ultimately what you're dealing with here, that I found in my research, but and that's also some other authors have also written about, is a kind of a spoiled identity. So it was spoiled in the first place because of the what happened in the run-up to the South African War and in the aftermath of that war. The Boers at that point weren't really seen as properly white. They were described as actually as sort of degraded colonists, that they'd been out of touch with Europe for too long, and they'd lost the ways of white civilization and so forth. There were comments about that they live in dirt and etc. and so uneducated, only if ever read the Bible. One person in the family, the father, has read the Bible, nobody else ever read anything, and so forth and so on. So there was a major, and then with of course the South African War, the humiliations of that war, how British imperialism also, or the British imperial identity, how it sort of imposes itself upon those people that are colonized, and here you had a sort of degraded class of settler. It was like a second class settler, the Boers, in relation to the British, and so forth. So our misfortune in South Africa is the fact that we had these two contending settler classes, and I think that's also the reason that when the rest of the world were moving away from direct colonialism, we actually instituted an even more forceful and bureaucratic form of colonialism in the form of apartheid, because of this contestation between these two settler classes, basically. So these degraded colonists were absolutely hell-bent to show that they're properly white, that they can outdo the British in every regard, they can out-white the Brits. And some interesting stuff been written, for example, on rugby as a game. Why choose rugby, the quintessential sort of British sport, to show their prowess in that. It's part of that competition, actually. Then when of course, the system of apartheid is instituted, more and more as the decades pass. By the 1960s, it becomes clear to some Afrikaners at least that the system is more and more, it can't be morally justified. That's why there was so much emphasis on the biblical justifications. The whole thing of morally justifying apartheid was a big part of instituting the system and keeping it in place. But that moral hold, that moral veneer that they were, I think we've mentioned the fact that denialism, outright lies, are a big part of whiteness. So that moral veneer, that false moral veneer that was plastered over apartheid was starting to seriously become sort of, unavoidably, one Afrikaners had to more and more face up to the fact that it's an unjustifiable system. So ultimately, you then arrive at the end of official apartheid. Now, remember, it is quite an unusual. I don't think one should exaggerate the importance, but it is an unusual situation to have a settler group. In fact, I don't think there is another example. A settler group actually giving up power, in the way that the Afrikaners did, and a big part of it was because of that moral. The moral justifications just did not hold anymore, basically, and the identity is in turmoil and trying to sort of reinstate itself, trying to find some kind of moral compass again, trying to and I think at the individual level show I'm a moral being, I'm an ethical human being, and so forth, to try to win back that kind of sense of moral worth. But of course, with the fall of apartheid, the official apartheid at least, we see the identity really being thrown into further turmoil around. So it's a kind of a moral stain that's on the identity that can't be gotten rid of, and that's why that's why I decided then authenticate, which basically means respectability or decency. Also, it's actually quite a wide term in the sense of its possible meanings. It also means comportment, actually how you carry yourself, having good manners, a way of speaking. And so for now that I'm living in Pretoria, it's amazing. It's like all around me. So it's a certain kind of way of presenting yourself as well, and so forth. And it is, so the identity very much for the past 20 odd years has been about how do we reinstate our moral worth? How do we achieve some kind of ethical humanity again? And so the book, in a sense, starts off with that and tries to approach it from various directions, including then this particular form of ethno-racial femininity, which has as its model the volksmoeder, mother of the nation. But the volksmoeder is a very particular kind of permutation of femininity, which is about, in the first place, of course, racial purity. So only certain kinds of sex can be had with certain kinds of people, and then, but also silence being a very, very important part of the self-silencing. So a lot of self-silencing sort of happening. It's actually, I managed to trace the trope of silence, the importance of silence as an Afrikaner woman, to trace that back to the early 20th century, poems being written, sort of revering the fact that Afrikaner women don't speak, and urging them to keep it up, don't say anything, please, and so forth. So yeah, so it's a big thing. It's a big thing. And then there's, of course, service, to be of service to your husband, your children, anybody else that ever wants you to be of service, just be of service. And with that, running through all of that, of course, self-sacrifice, and so forth. So it's looking at authenticate, but then with this, what does it mean actually for women to be authentic? And that sexual disciplining being very important. The whole issue of keeping your mouth shut, thank you very much, and so forth. All of those things being very important in terms of achieving this authenticate. If you're a woman, it will look obviously different in terms of men. Yeah, you'll be much more speaking. Much more speaking.
Thanks, Christi. Okay, so Henning Melber wrote, I think, a lovely review of your book. So he says, these women are required to sit pretty. That is, physically organize their bodies in accordance with certain prescriptions. And then, of course, also in the way in which the subjectivity is then being inscribed. Because I really like the way in which you track down the key formulations in your book, but say more about how you connect the sitting pretty with the post-structuralist analysis that you bring to bear right throughout this particular scholarly work. And that will be after this I will put one more question around.
So with the post-structuralist analysis is basically, I'm drawing on Foucault, Butler, the Clown Move, and so forth. And the idea is basically to try and understand how through discourses, we construct our identity. So I was paying attention to the kinds of exclusions and inclusions that you find in discourses. If you look at whiteness, I've already mentioned. It's a particular way that it's sort of that is sort of constituted also through discourse, and particularly what was interesting was these sort of kind of paradoxical language games, one could say, that are played to create a certain kind of whiteness. Because the big thing is now that you can't actually, because if you think now sitting pretty plays on two things. On the one side, on the one hand, it's about heterofemininity and how that requires you to present your body in a particular kind of way. Literally, you have to embody it in a particular kind of way. You have to sit pretty. And on the other hand, of course, it also plays on white privilege. You know, so to still be comfortable and actually beyond comfortable in a post-apartheid context. So in terms of then achieving, you know, to be able to continue to sit pretty, for example, you engage in a particular kind of construction of whiteness, and in which you, in terms of these language games that are played, you, for example, what was interesting were these kinds of reversals that are done. You can't admit anymore as a white person that you're a racist. It's only sort of rarely, well, in fact, you have these people who like to go and put it out on social media, so we do have people who like to do that. But I have to also say that my interviews were done 6 years ago, so the political moment was a bit different to now. So at that point in time, it was actually quite unimaginable to claim racism as a valid position as a white person. So, but you are still racist. You still regard yourself as superior on the basis of your whiteness. So there are other kinds of language games that you play. For example, around certain kinds of, if you think about identicate, and you think about being ethical being, certain kinds of reversals that are done where, for example, our democratic era that we find ourselves in now, the fact that we are in a context of a constitutional democracy, and so how that is sort of painted as it's out of control, it's chaotic, it's criminal, it's corrupt, and so forth. And then apartheid, kind of a juxtaposition is created with apartheid as actually those were the days of law and order. Those were the days when people still knew their place, and they still knew what was expected of them, and they were still honest, and they were still. So you find these, but they're done in very, as I say, clever kinds of word plays and language games and so forth. I mean, there's a very long list of examples that I won't go into now, but so it's basically using post-structuralist discourse analysis to drill down into these narratives and to find these discourses that make it possible for women to construct these particular ethno-racial heterofemininities. So maybe another one that I should mention around heterofemininity, it's quite funny. So you have to, you're now in a constitutional democracy, you should be embracing the rights that you now have as a woman, you know, but they don't sit that easily with you. So one of my favorite quotes is from a woman who said, you know, obviously in my house, in my family, my husband and I are completely equal. It's just that he takes the final decision. So it's an interesting, she couldn't, it's sort of beyond, you can't say that that there's not equality. But she, you know, she has to admit, well, this is actually how this equality is playing itself out, you know.
Okay, then as a final question from my side, which of course follows actually between Henning Melbourne and other reviews on a critique of plagiarism, is that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Say more about that?
Well, looking at this question of identicate and this question of actually regaining moral worth, you know, the question was how could that be done, you know, and it can only be done through a mutual recognition of the humanity of those people whose humanity was denied, you know, under apartheid and colonialism. So I was sort of, I had this one respondent that it was very interesting, the kind of sort of thinking and how she was how she was wrestling really with her identity and trying to make sense of herself, you know, and you know, wanting to take responsibility. You know, because some people say, well, what do you expect? Do I have to feel guilty? You know, the question for me is more, can you take responsibility? That to me is the question. Can you actually take responsibility as a white person who's benefited from decades of advantaging on the basis of racism? You know, can you take responsibility? So this particular respondent was really grappling with that question, and what came to the fore in the end was, through the emotion of shame, she was actually able to do, I think, important subjective, you know, work. So at the subjective level, just to work with herself in relation to black people, and trying to create an interaction of humanizing, you know, of actually, so as I said, this book is very much about identity creation at the subjective level. So it does sort of go to that sort of question, rather than looking at more sort of larger scale or collective efforts, you know. But the thing is, for me, if I could just fast forward to this very moment, around the stuff that's happening with AfriForum and the kinds of, I don't know if AfriForum features in Port Elizabeth, but they do feature quite strongly where I'm based at the moment. And you know, so purporting to speak on behalf of, you know, white people, on behalf of Afrikaners, and so forth. The question is definitely coming up more and more in my interactions with people that some kind of collective action from white people is necessary to distance themselves in the first place from the likes of AfriForum, but to also engage in a much more productive way, you know, sort of what you were saying earlier on, upscaling, you know, the possibility of, you know, this mutual human recognition, you know, turning that into some kind of political project. But of course, you know, the problem is always, you don't want to mobilize white people. That just seems a bit Ku Klux Klanish, you know. So you also don't, a lot of Afrikaners don't want to, progressive Afrikaners, radical Afrikaners, they don't want to mobilize as Afrikaners. Because they don't see themselves in the first place as Afrikaners, they see themselves in the first place as South Africans. And they are usually engaged in places where they're making a productive contribution. So it's quite difficult to think what kind of form this could take. But it would seem to me, given the growing racial divisiveness and polarization that we've got in our country, these kinds of public displays of racism and so forth, that white people who want to live differently should be much more vocal against those public racists and also those private racists.
Okay, in fact, I've not yet that was not the line, I'm sorry, no, but I will be with you now, okay? Because it's a huge interest, which I actually encountered for the first time when I read the kind of autobiographical works of Althusser when he was, you know, in the asylum. You know, as you know, he had the argument because he killed his wife, you know, and he was then regarded as insane. He couldn't stand trial for the murder of his wife, which later on, when of course he was in a much more brighter moment, he regarded the fact that he could not be found guilty as one of the things that makes him at that very moment inhuman. So the right to be guilty is constitutive of being a human being. And so if you then displace the capacity for guilt and working through guilt, and if you then displace the capacity for working through shame, you more or less working against your own humanity. And for that reason, you won't be able to reach out across the various divides for a collective humanity to emerge on that side. Now, you seem to think that shame can be an enabling mechanism for humanness in the context of publicity through which one has to work. And that will really be my last interjection. Can you say something a little bit more about that?
Well, so if you think about how shame has been studied over the past few decades. In the social sciences, there's been a shift towards looking at affect or at emotion, and seeing how affect actually operates in relation to the constitution of identities, and seeing it actually as one of those human phenomena that in fact do also constitute that we actually draw on to constitute our subjectivities. But so the question around shame is, well, as an emotion, it's seen as a more social emotion, and it is actually about engaging with others. And if you can be shamed by an other, it's because, in a sense, you can't be shamed by someone that you don't regard as fully human, basically. It's a kind of in that moment of shaming, of experiencing shame in the eyes of the other, you have to recognize that other as fully human. Because only somebody who is fully human would be able to shame you, basically. So it's actually about I don't know if it's too abstract, but it is about that mutual human sort of recognition in that moment. And I give a few, I have a few narratives from this particular respondent that actually demonstrate that, her own sense of shame in relation to black people that she had been engaging with, and what happened in that interaction. And that was completely, for her it was transformative in terms of her own interaction and her own practice. And of course we know that obviously it's very important to change institutions, to change policies, etc., etc. But if you look, for example, at something like institutional culture, where does it get formed, and how do we, one of the reasons why institutional culture, for example, at the university is so extremely hard to try and work with, to transform, is because it's actually happening at that intersubjective level between two people. I approach a counter, I hear it so many times from students, I approach a counter at the student center and I ask a question and I get treated completely differently to the student before me, etc., etc. And the student before me was white and I'm black. And it's those micro hostilities, those humiliations and so forth that happen at that micro level of interaction. So that's why I think this question of shame and this possibility of change through shame could be very important.
Well, thank you very much, Christian. Of course, then it becomes a true ethical position. If you work it through mobilizing the construct of shame. Noble, you ready for us? Okay, right. Okay, I'll take 3 questions at a time. Nancy, you didn't ask me to but you can have a short question. Yeah, okay. Nancy told me earlier today I must stop her when she puts up her hand. She did. So, 2 short questions now. No keynotes. And if you want to make a keynote, approach us, right? In abstract, we'll give you a platform here, okay? Right. We have very interesting discussions here. And then I had another hand there, right? 3. Those 3 in a row. Let's go. Right. Nancy?
Thank you very much, Christi, for your presentation. It's actually helping me think about the section I'm working on the model and political economy of race in Millen's novel. So I'm sure you know what the work said about it. Okay, we'll talk about that another time. Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, thank you. It's helping me work through Millen. But I have 2 questions for you. The one is a bit mischievous, but it's very important as well. Because Sitting Pretty is located there. It's the idea of relationality and sexuality and what defines white women's prettiness. especially now in the contemporary era of voluptuousness curves and like, I'm sure you've seen that meme. I know we're not supposed to do a meme here, but they're very important. That meme for the white women who play volleyball, and then it says, fellas, watch out, white women are evolving, because they've got, it's very sexist, but because I mean it's body shaming and objectification, but it's relying on the idea that white women's bodies are not necessarily, they don't come into play when we conceptualize, we have the discourse of beauty and sexuality. It's often the sexualization of the black body, and if you relate it to a duplicate, and the white body is supposed to be, the proportions are not in excess, you know? So it's not a big bum, and it's not big thighs, and it's not the way that you would speak about black bodies. White bodies are seldom spoken about in that particular way.
There's longer than an extra now.
Sorry.
The second question.
So I want to know, what are your thoughts around that in the contemporary South African racial politics and relationality, especially with young white people against and their dating and sexual record against that of their parents, the older generation? Because now it's a different relationship with the body, with the white body for white women. And then the other one is this narrative around Puk, right? Is the one, the gentleman who died recently, around Puk Botha and his relationship with the ANC. What's your take on that recently? Because I've only heard it from SAFM, but I'd like to know what's happening in Victoria and in your space.
Okay. I am Puk.
So, thank you very much for this last piece that you were talking about, Christi. I was rushing here this afternoon because I thought this room will be filled with white Afrikaans-speaking women, and there's not very many of us. But so my question is around this thing of shame, which is a very hard burden to kind of hold. And I think that you are absolutely right, that in the it's in the work that is done through shame, in that relational thing, that shifts can happen. But so I'm wondering, one of the reasons why there aren't white Afrikaans speaking women, why racism is actually hardening, is because that work is so very hard, you know, and that people, it's just unbelievable to go into the space of shame and how to do that and how to kind of support people in moving into that space.
White Afrikaans men, I think you call them WAMs in your book, if I remember correctly. We had some difficult conversations around the good white this past week, and I would wonder how would the construction of identicates for white Afrikaans men look like. And then also a question around shame, because obviously the way femininity is constructed, female honor is situated in shame. So for us to do the work of sitting in our shame, I'm wondering if that is not easier than for men whose honor is situated in the avoidance of shame. So would that work in the construction of masculinity? So I'm pushing further to the white Afrikaans man.
Thank you so much for that. I think let me start at the end. I mean, that sounds like a fantastic study. I would encourage you to embark upon it. I did actually write one of the shorter chapters in the book is actually looking at Afrikaner men from the vantage point of these women through their discourses, and I really think it would be very useful to do a study like this with Afrikaner men. You know, I think you're making a very good point around around also the gendered difference in relation to shame. You know, whether shame is a you know, how it would actually play out in relation to masculinity. I think that's a very good question. I wouldn't want to hazard a guess, I have to say. Because I think one would probably have to do it properly. You know. So yeah, I'm going to have to leave it at that. In terms of shame as a burden, the thing is that and I'm just thinking of it also just in terms of just ordinary human life. You know, it's not like one has to now from day to day, you like dragging your shame with you. I'm thinking more in relation to, you know, when one is actually in situations, you know, in those intersubjective sort of moments in interaction with somebody, and you know, how are you responding? How are you, and to be able to in that moment actually recognize, you know, recognize your own response, seeing how you are actually treating people, and so forth. You know, I think it's even for me it starts at that very basic level. Also, if I just think anecdotally, conversations with people, on the one hand, and on the other hand, having been involved in transformation processes at the University of Pretoria and trying to address questions of institutional culture and how difficult it is. It's really in that. It's that, you know, whiteness plays itself out frequently just in that intersubjective sort of micro moment, that micro interaction, you know, where the whiteness is sort of playing itself out. And I'm thinking that if shame is an emotion that's being held close by, then maybe, you know, and there can be a checking, and there can be some introspection and some reflection. You know, that will really, to my mind, make a huge difference. You know, unfortunately, if you just see, I mean, worldwide, I mean, this of course the issue of white intransigence isn't just a South African issue. This is something that we see in global politics. We're seeing it in the faces of these angry white men. You know, Trump. I mean, every single that's his sort of stock kind of face is this angry. He's this angry man, you know. And if you think of the Kavanaugh hearing, also this angry man, very angry, you know. Like so from those kinds of global kinds of you know, globally transmitted you know, permutations of you know, of this kind of hard whiteness that's pushing back. Obviously, that's also informing then these micro interactions. You know, I hope that answers the question to some extent. So I mean, so I don't know. I mean, for me, shame at least is a complete contradiction to that. You know, to that anger, this sort of white entitlement that's manifesting itself through this anger. That anger for me is really about entitlement. It's really about, you know, how dare you try to tip me off my little pedestal, you know. I will not, you know. So it's the ultimate actually white supremacism, actually. In terms of in terms of younger women and younger white people, and sort of the current kind of fashions around more voluptuous bodies and so on. My study, the youngest woman is 30, and it's actually I'm supervising a student at the moment at UCT who's looking at women between the ages of 20 and 30. So because it is quite an interesting question. What would this look like actually for much younger women, you know. So in terms of women's, of course, you know, white women are not, you know, I do want to say that, you know, I mean, there's a kind of the most revered form of white heterofemininity, which is still that passive, you know, sort of also your body without curves, quite desexualized, and so forth. You know, which is then some kind of a desexualization, some kind of sign of purity. So yes, that is certainly still in strong circulation. But I do think that some other white female bodies have also emerged. And of course, the minute one brings in class and sexuality, then also the diversity in terms of the embodiments also changes, I'm glad to say. You know, so yeah, so I would sort of advocate seeing the actual existing diversity as opposed to the model that's held forth. Of course, that model has got incredible purchase, and that I also found in my analysis of the Sari Women's Magazine. What's been aspired, what these women are actually reaching out for and trying to embody is that white middle class heterofemininity that's being broadcast out from Europe and the States, basically. So, and then Pik Botha, yeah, of Pik. Well, Pik is one of those. I saw actually a very good cartoon showing what the yin and yang of Pik. You know, so on the one hand, how he was, he never came clean on the apartheid atrocities. He never told us what he definitely knew. That's, you know, but on the other hand, he was one of those leaders in the party who did actually push the party more and more from the, I would say from the 1970s, actually, from the minute he started to move up in the ranks of the party, he was starting to push the party towards the end of, you know, to ending apartheid. So, but in him, but he probably had I wouldn't want to at all suggest that he had a full constitutional democracy in mind where he didn't have some kind of white veto. Because remember, they had some weird fantasy about a white veto. So I'm sure he was still in the white veto camp, you know. But he was definitely one of those characters who was pushing things along. But one has to compare him to something like an F.W. de Klerk, who was not that kind of person. F.W. de Klerk was deeply conservative, you know, even within the politics of the party, you know. So Pik was always seen as sort of maverick, you know. So he's a bit of an outlier, but sometimes it is the outlier that also proves, you know. So.
I'm getting now. In fact, just on the question of where, you know, the room and so on. I actually like this the crowd that pitch it various kinds of ways. It's almost like a question, you know. And also our discussions, no, are very, very complicated and difficult. And you know, the questions about where is this and how about that is outside of our frame of thinking. You know? It's not just deep engagement with those who comes into the space. I used to ask my students when they ask, where are this one, say, why didn't you bring him or her along? You know, so the question can't be raised in this space. So I want to acknowledge actually the people that pitch on Fridays, Thursdays, into the Bird Street space. Just from that perspective, it has been wonderful for us to put very, very complicated and crucial issues on the table and actually have thoughtful, rigorous and critical discussions about it, you know, which also makes people uncomfortable this way or the other. So we'll hope, you know, as we move along next year, you know, that we will up the game as well, you know, that it becomes more integrated, more engaging across different sets of divides and so on. But everything must begin somewhere, you know, and for that I'm very grateful. So my thanks, you know, in advance. Of course, I will say something again later on. But I just want to settle that debate so that we don't waste time with those kinds of questions, okay? All right. So it's Ellen, and then of course, ma'am, please go ahead. Yeah?
Christi, the question I want to ask is, if we consider shame as a powerful tool for change. It changes us, and obviously you're seeing that, and if one considers your own life, and I don't need to go into that, but I ask myself, so what stops us from feeling shame? You know? And have you considered in your book, I haven't read your book, to what extent is fear one of the reasons why we don't go there? I mean, I can imagine many reasons why we don't want to go to any place that's painful. I'm just wondering about fear in the context of what you did and who you spoke to, whether that ever came up. And then I ask myself, if fear is one of the reasons why we don't go there, how do we stop ourselves from being so afraid? Or not, even if we don't ask how do we stop ourselves, but to recognize that fear is a massive element in stopping certain things, and that we need to consider why we become afraid and what adds to that.
Thanks, Christi. So I'm also still coming into the shame piece. And what's in my mind is the question of intergenerational shame. Now, there's a lot of work that was done on the Holocaust and finding that grandchildren of Holocaust, survivors still feel the pain. And I was just wondering, as we look at our situation in the country, we of course realize that there's a lot of work to be done in terms of as we have to do a rebuild. But there's the sexist saying that don't something the sins of the father on the children. Now, I'm just trying to figure, and I'm thinking about this in the sense also of the work of Johnson with the knowledge in the blood, how these intergenerational issues get passed down, and as we plan to work with it, is there a sunset clause? Is there a point? Is there a time where we say, right, okay, we understand the legacy of apartheid and the privilege, etc. But what happens here with this new generation? Because I'm worried personally at university in that we never get young white people coming into the spaces where we actually work, and they need to come. But what is actually holding them back? Thanks.
Okay, let me hand over to a young white person here for the last question of this round.
I wanted to build on what I think it's Des said about what holds people back from experiencing shame, and part of that being. And I wanted to just ask you to speak about the role of maybe solidarity in overcoming that fear, and maybe what the cost is when you start to actually see people or experience that shame in terms of potentially breaking with your own people, using that shelter that you might have.
Right, after this we're going to have one last round of questions.
Okay. So, what stops us from feeling shame? Fear. I'm not sure. Fear of what? I mean, could you? But if you say fear, and I think the last person also seemed to find resonance with this idea of fear possibly playing an interrupting kind of role. But
so if I think of conversations with friends, with colleagues, with people I deal with, and I listen to, if I think of how afraid people are of the other, and afraid of things in the country and all sorts, and I'm wondering how that is stopping them from reaching out, from becoming friends across racial borders. They're afraid of blacks, and how that gets grouped together for them. And I'm wondering whether that is what's holding them back from moving to a place of letting the pain of the past bring some transformation. And I say that in the context of as we are in a country now, people are very afraid.
Well, I do think maybe, do you want to add something?
I just wanted to say that I don't think that fear always have a rational, very often, I think fear doesn't have a rational grounds. So the fear is very real and it's very inhibiting in this instance, for example. That's not to say that there's a real danger, but nevertheless the fear kind of has this inhibiting kind of impact on people.
Well, we have to remember that the discourse of fear was a very strong kind of discourse that ran throughout the colonial era, the apartheid era. And, in fact, Andre's just reminding me of the zwart gevaar, the rooi gevaar, the roomse gevaar. There were a lot of gevaar. That's poor Afrikaans, I don't know how we made it out. Shame. So yeah, there were a lot of, but this whole thing of being afraid, I mean, it was something that was also, I think, consciously advanced by everybody from the politicians to the intellectuals. We had of course, the churches and so forth. So this idea of being afraid and so forth. So it's for me, it's always been, I don't know, I can't, because it's been a white supremacist system, and people who's had power have, are white, were white. The people who actually enacted the most violence against other people were white people enacting violence against black people. So I've never quite understood the whole fear discourse myself. I think that we are today, obviously we are a very violent bunch of people living here in South Africa, white and black, and those kinds of, I mean, that kind of interpersonal violence is happening, and violence by strangers and so forth, the kind of extreme violence that frequently accompanies crimes that you don't need the violence as well. You can just take the cell phone and go, whatever. So yes, so I can understand, but that for me is a sort of a bit apart from what we're talking about here, because we're talking about being at work, being in the workplace, being in interaction with people, being perhaps in a church, in interaction with people or some other group that one might belong to. And actually engaging, I mean, surely in that situation it's not about fear. I mean, I think for me in that situation it's actually about whiteness actually acting as a hindrance, the kinds of assumptions that we make as white people, the kinds of, the fact that we've been trained in a, one has to think about race as a form of training. It's a kind of, we've been trained, and our parents have been trained, and our grandparents and so forth, and all of us, actually, black and white people, have been trained in this way of thinking. And perhaps fear, the construction of fear, is also part of that way of the way that we've been trained to think. And for me, the challenge is, if I'm standing, at work and I'm making a cup of tea and my black colleague comes in, obviously I'm not overcome with fear. I mean, that for me doesn't make sense. For me, but how do I actually engage with people that I share spaces with? We are now in South Africa trying to create integrated spaces. We're having sort of mixed results, let's put it that way. I always say when I'm in Joburg, that Joburg's social spaces for me are what South Africa should be. For me, Joburg is the presence of South Africa in the future, or something like that. So it is happening. I mean, there is this, so we are starting to create these integrated spaces, And the thing is for me, as white people then, to confront ourselves in those moments, in those spaces, these new spaces that we are creating, to actually engage in a different way, So I want to take it away from crime. I think anybody is scared of being a victim of crime in South Africa. We know, of course, black people are more often victims of crime. So I think crime is a very particular. In fact, I mean, we're very unfortunate that that we've created socioeconomic conditions that have actually produced the levels of crime that we have, because crime does, I think, interfere also with our ability to connect with one another. But I'm just thinking, in those spaces where we are sharing spaces, so whether it's a church space or a work space or whatever, I mean, more and more in our families are slowly becoming a bit more integrated. So in those spaces, what's happening? How are we actually, as white people, engaging? You know, how are we connecting? Are we allowing some kind of connection? I don't know if this also partly addresses the last question. Yeah.
What I meant more was that I think that the fear of breaking with whiteness, the fear of breaking with the formations of whiteness holds us back. We're now experiencing that shame fully and deeply by moving to a different position. And what is that position going to be? And will I lose the protection of whiteness by doing that? And that's what I'm saying. I'm not afraid in any sense to interact with people of color on a daily basis. I agree with you that fear isn't, I don't experience that. But I think that why don't I stand up more in conversations with other white people to their assumptions, or when I see them echo thoughts that I've questioned myself, why am I not more vocal? It's the fear of losing that friendship, or the fear of, offending that person. And that's why I'm talking about the role of solidarity amongst white people to move us collectively. You talked about a form of white, but you don't want to mobilize around that, which I understand. But yeah, that's more what I meant.
I think that's a very good point around the fear of losing the privileges that whiteness actually holds.
Yeah, Chris, before you move on to the others, please allow me as well. I do think that we will have to make Marissa and the others probably set aside some kinds of discussions around fear and anxiety within the context of present South Africa, because I do appreciate the fact that you've raised the way that you've raised it, and of course Rachel's contributions there are fascinating, and you can see it will probably operate in a variety of different kinds of levels, but I am so sure that Christie's analysis around being trained into fear, with capital letters, was a political project, that actually upheld the system of apartheid and whiteness over many, many, many decades. And that's why you can easily pick so many gevaren from the history books and political speeches in those eras. And of course, those are trained formulations and part of the hard work actually at the subjective level, and where subject means structure, where one has to do some very, very decent work. Because the makings of those kinds of things are already rested in sociality. It's not as if we don't have examples, you see? So we know that there is something that requires a different sets of movements, especially also at the intimate level, and also at the friendship level and the familiar level, where you can literally see already shifts in the making. We have to upscale that into a political project of solidarities, or as you would say in the world of politics of recognition, across the variety of divides that we have. Sorry for that.
I think I just still a response. I don't think there's ever going to be a sunset clause on reckoning with our past. I actually came across a fantastic quote of James Baldwin's where he was saying that, but the history is not in the past, history is in the present. In the present. And that we carry, the thing is, we necessarily, whether we like it or not, we carry our histories with us. We carry this national history with us, we carry those personal histories, some of which are completely horrendous. We carry all of that with us. And there's no escaping that. So I think we need to engage. We need to turn around and actually look that in the eye, and it never stops. And I think, I frequently get this from colonialism again. Like, I say, well, this is a system that for 400 years, wreaked havoc upon this planet, upon humankind. You know, what on earth can you? So you think like, and we're barely out of it. And in fact, it's actually continuing. If you look at the decolonial scholars, I do think that the concept of coloniality is a very powerful concept. You know, it's finding new and insidious ways to continue into the present. You know, so that idea that you just at some point you just leave it behind. You know, it's just that human life just doesn't work like that. So we need to have the courage to actually to look that in the eye. Look, I mean, I think it's quite distressing if you just anecdotally see what's happening with younger white people. You know, the kinds of like racist incidents, sexist incidents, and so forth. It's almost like there's a kind of a transmission of those toxic ideas. Just, you know, as Jonathan Nelson was saying, you know, the knowledge in the blood. You know, there's a transmission of those toxic ideas straight, and these young people are the carriers. Now, and I think it's worse with Afrikaners because of that idea of accepting what your elders tell you, this idea of being not questioning. I mean, a lot of the pushback that I get from in terms of my public work and something that I do is actually, but you're a woman, you shouldn't be speaking. You're a woman, you shouldn't be asking questions. Why asking these questions? You know, I mean, a lot of the effort is actually going to silencing as well, trying to get you to stop speaking. You know, and so that's very much a hangover from Afrikaner nationalism. You know, that quashing of alternative ideas. I mean, this whole idea of andersdenkendheid, to think differently, was absolutely maligned. You have to be andersdenken, to think similarly. You have to think similarly with the group. You have to conform. Conform is a very high price that's put on conformism, actually. And that's part of the problem. So that's what in democracy, we want people to actually to think further, to ask those questions. You know, I mean, that's why it's a wonderful conversation that we're having here, and I do appreciate it.
It is great, actually. I'm going to stop it now and just checking because, you know, one of the things why people always come here, you know, is because we stick to our 90 minutes. And then, of course, the real discussions continue, you know, in the other kinds of spaces. So I thought that we will have another round, but I do think, Christi, would you like to make a final closing remark, or are you covered?
No, I'm actually covered, and I'm looking forward to joining this intellectual community next year, and it's wonderful to engage with you.
Thank you very much. Now, of course, a zillion thanks to all of you. Ellen, you and your team, of course, as always, thanks. And tomorrow, Ellen will chair the session on Is a Critically White Project Possible? Please come. I think that we are busy with real important work and real social big questions that needs to be asked. So do come. And of course, you know, for my team, the Falstein Street environment. Thanks so much always for this support. You know, so I have to say this all the time, just to acknowledge you know, that things run, you know, without you even thinking about it. So fantastic. So we'll tomorrow. Oh yes. Yeah. Of course, yeah. Tomorrow. Our Friday starts at 2:30 because apparently the university actually comes to a standstill in any case around about lunch. I'm just joking. And then you come here on your way home. You come for 2 hours, have a glass of wine, have a nice discussion, and there you are. And we get the university moving. Okay. The right direction. So thank you so much. Please hang around and stay around and enjoy and chill around, okay?